Never mind. Oh,
Point in our lives, most of us have probably wished we could live forever. Being immortal sounds pretty good at first. Essentially not aging after a certain point, being unable to die of natural causes, not a bad life. But what if everyone became immortal overnight? What if the entire world's population stopped dying? At the current rate, approximately 152,000 people die every day around the world. That's about 2 per second, so assuming our immortality event happens instantly, that would mean 2 unlucky souls would miss it by as little as a fraction of a second. If we assume everyone stopped dying at the time of making this video, the world population would quickly start climbing from about 7.6 billion. At the current rate, about 360,000 people are born each day, and the current death rate slows apparent population growth by about 42%. When this immortality event occurred, we'd begin to see dramatic changes to our society. Contrary to what you'd probably expect, overpopulation wouldn't be the first problem we'd have to deal with. If people stopped dying, the population would start to increase more quickly, but it wouldn't become a crisis for at least a few years. One of the first negative impacts of this change would likely be the ironic death of the funeral industry. If no one dies of natural causes, there's no one to bury, no funerals to arrange, no caskets to sell. Funeral homes would have to rely on victims of violent crime, car accidents, and other unnatural causes of death to make a living. Meanwhile, in hospitals, people sick with formerly terminal illnesses would exist in a permanent state of pain, unable to die, and their families would be stuck with their continued medical bills. These hospitals would begin to become overcrowded, as new patients are admitted for various unnatural injuries and conditions. When the world begins to feel the strain of overpopulation, especially after children are born, grow up, and start having children of their own, we'd begin to see crises in several areas. First, natural resources would be depleted at an alarming rate. Fossil fuels, already running out today, would be used up much more quickly, forcing the world to adopt new sources of energy to keep society running. Available land supply would dwindle, with new housing springing up in any vacant lot to accommodate the rapidly growing population. Even if we could keep up with the demand for housing, young people entering the job market would be met with little to no opportunity for employment, all the jobs already snatched up by those who came before them. As the unemployed begin to pile up, homelessness would become a real problem, made worse by the spike in housing prices when space inevitably runs out. Natural food would come at a premium, as land used for livestock or crops would dwindle and suffer under the strain of so many new mouths to feed. The food industry would have to turn to heavily processed and cheaply manufactured food, potentially causing even more widespread nutritional problems than we have today. With so many people out of work, homeless, and hungry, and with no room to spread out, civil unrest would start building. We'd begin to see riots in the streets of major cities, anywhere there's a concentrated population of the unemployed. On a larger scale, nations without room for their citizens may feel the obligation to challenge their neighbors for their territory or resources, sparking large wars. Governments would probably secretly see these wars as serving multiple purposes: to expand their territory and living space, but also to help thin the population. Then there are more extreme possibilities. With all other options exhausted, perhaps we'd see a real-life implementation of death sports like those in the Hunger Games or ancient Rome. Maybe forced euthanasia would become the norm for the unfit, both young and old, in order to allow the healthiest members of society to survive. Or, more realistically, we might see stringent restrictions on the number of children allowed per family, perhaps based on social status, occupation, or income. But if we could get the population growth under control, the human race might not be as doomed as we think. We'd certainly have to live more frugal lives and likely have much less space to spread out, but with the right regulations in place, it could be sustainable, at least for the near future. In the wake of our new immortality, we might see new technologies developed to accommodate the larger and longer-lived population. Homes designed to allow humans to live in areas once considered undesirable, allowing the more adventurous people to have a bit more space, at the expense of safety or convenience. Technological progress would likely increase, as the demand for new innovations to help ease the population strain would grow, and longer lives would allow scientists and innovators more time to perform studies and develop new ideas. Provided the world didn't collapse beforehand, on a personal level we might become more creative and artistic, our longer lives allowing us to pursue new hobbies and skills over decades, instead of limiting ourselves to just a few. We'd have the chance to live smaller mini-lives, living in one place for 50 years, then moving and pursuing a new career somewhere else. If the world could sustain such a drastic change, it would be interesting to see what an immortal society would look like. Of course, it's very unlikely that it would, as the strain from so many new mouths to feed and people to house would simply be too much. Luckily, immortality probably isn't something we'll ever have to accommodate, and certainly not overnight. What do you think? What would an immortal society look like, and what changes would you expect to see in the world? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe.